Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala barakatuh. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya wal mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Alhamdulillah. In the previous video, I've explained to you how the nature of our human self, right, in terms of our spiritual, emotional, mental and physical realm. Within even the new sciences, we have that the brain is operating not only in the physical realm but also dimensionally in many other realms, up to 11 realms. So that's the dimension that we are talking about. But in the Quran, Allah tells us about the 7 samawat, the 7 realms of the universe. All right. So we have to strengthen our iman, our understanding that we are operating beyond just a physical thing, because a physical matter, even you go backward into nature, if we say that we are a physical being, what is a physical being? Oh, we are made up of organs. Organs is made up of what? Of molecules. Molecules is made up of atoms. Even if you say about atoms, you have the electron and neutron moving around, so-called moving around, because they are not moving around because they are waves. There is 99.999% empty space in each of the so-called atom that you have. If we go even further downward, then you have the subatomic particle quarks and so on, and you go at another level, that will be energy. Where does all these things come into being? So actually a physical reality that we see today is a manifestation ordained by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to exist in the form that we see as physical. But physicality or operationally within this physical realm, say the brain, we can see the physicality of the brain, but does it operate only on the brain? Definitely it can operate logically at many levels. So we say that our brain can operate at the spiritual level, at the conscious, subconscious and supraconscious level, at the brain level. Our heart, our cup is interacted with it, and our physical self is all linked together in our nafs. Alright? So this is something that inshallah Muslim scholars will take more studies, and in our book, in our model chapter 5, I just read one or two paragraphs. And then I'll show you a video of this project, the Tumble project. Modern research in neurology points to the importance of the limbic system and the brainstem in processing human consciousness. All the neural and dendrite connections of both the left and right brain is networked into the limbic system and the brainstem, which is the center of the hub of all our brain function, both conscious and unconscious. The limbic system stroke brain stem of the brain help to coordinate and process all our conscious and unconscious inner speech. We also now know that the physical brain is just one aspect or domain of our existence. Modern brain science is proving that true nature of the transcendental human self that is consonant with the Islamic principle. From the perspective of Islamic psychology, our model that we are propounding to the world, human beings have 6 sensory capabilities which can transcend beyond the realm of space and time. The laws of learning in which we are talking about in terms of our model must then cater for the holistic human domains of existence. That means the spiritual, emotional, mental and physical. So we talk about laws of learning now, we are talking about just animal. Animal is just brain, brain is just physical. No. We have this holistic integration of how we can actually live and reach a higher level of consciousness in terms of our understanding of our existence and in terms of our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and our relationship with the physical world. Alright? If human laws of learning only covers a 5 sensory aspect, it will not be complete and cannot be the real holistic law of human learning. A better understanding of the quantum nature of this universe, we will also begin to understand the existence of the realms as beyond our 5 physical senses, and our understanding of quantum mechanics is already transforming our notion of this relationship. Okay, so I'll just show you a video of this project, alright, and then you can understand in greater detail.
It may be the ultimate unresolved mystery of human life. How and why does consciousness exist? Although some scientific literature acknowledges that the question remains, the overwhelming consensus among neuroscientists today is that the brain alone creates conscious experience. The brain is described as a genetically programmed computer whose electrical and biochemical processes produce what we experience as thought and decision-making. It's therefore no surprise that science headlines today suggest that the experience of free will is merely an illusion, a byproduct of so-called background noise in the brain. In popular media, we are presented with a black and white dilemma. We must choose between reason and rationality, or superstition and blind faith. However, for decades, some acclaimed scientists around the world have conducted consciousness research that provides a very different picture. The evidence these researchers present suggests that the brain alone does not produce consciousness, but rather, the source and locus of consciousness is non-material. Some proponents of this burgeoning field now refer to it as post-materialist science. One of the most remarkable of these researchers is Dr. Gary Schwartz, professor of psychology, medicine, neurology, psychiatry, and surgery at the University of Arizona, and director of its Laboratory for Advances in Consciousness and Health. We asked Dr. Schwartz for his thoughts on the mystery of consciousness, beginning with the question, how did institutional science arrive at its current position, that the brain alone produces conscious experience?
Conventional and contemporary neuroscientists, as a general rule, all believe, in fact, they assume, that the brain creates consciousness, that consciousness is a byproduct or side effect of brain function. And this is what's called the materialist perspective. It's the idea that reality is defined first and foremost in terms of matter, that it's only material things that exist, and therefore anything else that exists, such as consciousness and subjective experience, that by definition this has to be created by a material object, such as the brain. And so the assumption is therefore that anything that we think or do not only involves our brain, but requires our brain, and therefore when our brain ceases to function, i.e. when it dies, our consciousness, quote, dies too, because it's dependent entirely on the brain. Now, that view, which is the current accepted view, in my opinion, and a group of other scientists' opinion, is wrong. And there is a new movement called post-materialist science, which in fact, there is just what's called a manifesto for post-materialist science that was published in the scientific journal Explore, which was co-written by Mario Beauregard, myself, Lisa Miller, and a group of 5 other scientists, including Larry Dossey and Rupert Sheldrake, which explains the alternative scientific perspective.
Despite the extraordinary advancements in neuroscience and neurotechnology, according to Dr. Schwartz, the sciences have failed to prove that the brain is the creator of consciousness rather than the receiver.
There are hundreds and hundreds of studies in cognitive neuroscience and emotional neuroscience, all of which presume, to quote, prove that mind and emotion are caused by the brain. However, and I would like to explain this, all of those studies, and there are hundreds if not thousands of them, use 3 basic kinds of procedures. And it's important for your listeners to understand it. Those procedures are correlation, stimulation, and ablation. Now, what does that mean in plain English? Correlation means, for example, they'll put electrodes on the occipital cortex, then they will, let's say, shine a light and show that there's a change in brainwaves, typically a reduction in what's called the alpha frequency, alpha blocking in the back of the head. Moreover, if a person imagines a light, you see a reduction in the alpha frequency in the back of the brain. So the first thing is we observe a correlation between conscious experience and brain function. Secondly, you could do stimulation. So, for example, you can, if the brain is exposed in surgery, you can literally use electrodes to stimulate the brain, which has been done. Or you can now use external stimulators, so using a magnetism, focused magnetism, to stimulate portions of the brain. And if you stimulate the occipital cortex, people report seeing lights. Also, you can do what's called ablation. Now, typically, we wouldn't do that purposely in humans. You would do that in animals. But there are natural ablations, either due to unfortunate accidents or diseases, strokes, where particular areas of the occipital cortex are damaged, and you will find decrements, or if not blindness, in selective regions of one's visual perception. So those three factors, correlation, stimulation, and ablation, triangulate. They all point to the idea that the brain is creating consciousness. Now, why is that not sufficient to conclude that the brain causes consciousness? And the reason is really very simple. And I actually learned this when I was in high school and then started out my undergraduate education in electrical engineering. Because the same three criteria are used to determine how a television set is working. So, for example, you do correlations. You put an oscilloscope probe on a particular portion of a circuit, and then you look to see if the signals are correlated with what you see on the screen. Then you do stimulation. They're literally electrical stimulators, and you stimulate different parts of the circuit, and you look to see changes that occur in the visual part of the screen or the monitor. And then thirdly, you do ablation, meaning you cut wires or you remove integrated circuits, and you look to see what parts of the signal go away. But you don't conclude from those three procedures that the television set created the signal. We know that the television set is an antenna receiver for the signals. So in other words, although correlation, stimulation, and ablation are consistent with the idea that a TV set or a brain could be creating the signals, it's equally consistent with the idea that a TV set or a brain could be picking up signals from outside the system. And therefore, you need to do additional kinds of research, different methods, to come to the conclusion about whether or not we're dealing with a creator of consciousness or an antenna receiver for consciousness. And that's why the research that I and my colleagues have been doing on mediums, for example, is so important for neuroscience and the brain, because if the brain was the creator of consciousness, then when a person's brain died, their consciousness would cease, case closed. But if our brains are really TV systems, they're antenna receivers for our minds, Dr. William Hiller calls them biosuits, if you would, that then if our brains die and our body's physical die, our consciousness hasn't died, i.e. the signal hasn't disappeared, because that was not the origin of the signal in the first place. And therefore, other people's minds and brains, for example, the minds of mediums, could pick them up. And that's why I've done so much research under single-blind, double-blind, and triple-blind conditions, and they all point to the conclusion that some mediums are real and that the information strongly supports the idea that consciousness survives physical death. And that's a post-materialist perspective.
Individuals who have experienced clinical death may provide one of the most critical clues on the source and essence of consciousness. While mainstream science attributes the so-called near-death experience entirely to brain activity, as Dr. Schwartz explains, this notion is complicated when all measurable brain activity has ceased.
The claim that staunch materialists would like to make is that many of what are called near-death experiences can be explained as residual firing of either the cortex or subcortical structures after it's been damaged or after the heart's stopped. The problem with that, I call it wishful thinking, is because if you look at both human research and animal research, it's well documented that literally all electrical activity ceases within 40 seconds to a minute of the time that blood flow has stopped going to the brain. There is no evidence of electrical firing of the brain at all. So for people to therefore think that somehow, well, their brain is still firing, it's just that we can't electrically see it, The reason why they're pushed to that conclusion is because they find it impossible to believe that one's consciousness could continue after the brain had stopped functioning. That's because they're stuck believing this simple materialist view. Now, those people have not thought through the issue of the fact that neuroscience methods, correlation, stimulation, and ablation, do not prove the conclusion that the brain creates consciousness any more than correlation, stimulation, and ablation would conclude that a television set created the TV signals. They don't understand that core logic.
The consensus theories of institutional science tell us that nature and all the universe is purposeless. What is institutional science contributing to humankind in our quest for personal and collective identity and meaning?
At a surface level, the material approach to science, if anything, is taking it away. It sees the universe as a material, cold, thoughtless, feelingless, loveless place for which there is no meaning or purpose. It's sort of order that's derived from chance, and it's just one of an infinite number of possibilities, universes. And that our ability to have meaning and to have subjective experiences is really a byproduct or a side effect of the evolution of matter, which is mostly driven by random processes. That view, if anything, robs the cosmos of meaning and purpose. However, when you take a
Alhamdulillah, these are alternative perspectives that we can understand of the nature of our roh. They're talking about this post-materialist worldview and understanding the nature of our existence, consciousness. They don't say it is a spirit, but they say consciousness beyond death. And there are many, many experiments now moving in that direction. So for Muslims, we must be well aware that this is the truth that Allah has given us, that our consciousness exists beyond the material plane. The material plane is just one plane or realm of existence that we are in right now, but we will transcend the material plane. That's why from the Islamic psychology model, our base is spiritual, our reality is spiritual, beyond space, beyond time, beyond quantum state even, and we are equipped with this roh, then we are equipped with the heart, the qalb, which can sense the spiritual realm and the mental realm and the physical realm. This is the center or loci of control. Then we have our mind, which is both the conscious, subconscious, and linked to the supraconscious at the E and S level. And then we have our jasad. When our jasad dies, we still have the faculty of spirituality, qalb, and akal in the realm of the supraconscious, nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's mentioned in the Quran many, many times, because from Allah we come and to Allah shall we return. And the whole mechanism of our nature of existence now is not something that we Muslims must defend dogmatically, but inshallah we'll have the scientific basis to explain to those who doesn't believe. Because for the atheists, if they don't believe, it's up to them. But for us, we know we are a conscious being created for a purpose and meaning in this life, to understand the grandeur of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to be His true and sincere servant, to be His Khalifa on this earth, and fulfilling our role on this earth, and moving on beyond space, beyond time, to another realm of Jannah in which He has prepared for us. Always striving to make ourselves good, helping others to be good, and making the world good, inshallah.